So, way back in 1988, there was this really powerful speech that warned of a coming global crisis. But here's the thing. The speaker wasn't talking about politics or the economy. No, he was talking about a spiritual sickness, and he had a pretty radical plan for a new kind of utopia. So, let's dive into what this vision was all about.
The whole speech kicks off with this very question: why now? You see, the speaker explained that after a lot of hesitation, it was finally time to release a new book of prophecies. He was convinced that a deep global crisis wasn't some far-off threat anymore. It was imminent, and people needed to be warned.
Okay, so what was this big crisis he was talking about? Well, according to him, if you looked at prophecies from all over, from Nostradamus to John of Patmos, they were all pointing to the same thing. Yeah, they were all different, but they shared one core message. A major crisis was on its way, probably within the next 10 to 20 years.
And this is where it gets really personal. He throws this direct challenge out to everyone listening. If society does start to unravel, like the prophecies say, what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? I mean, what can you actually rely on when everything you thought you knew gets shaken to its core?
But here's the twist. The speaker argues that the root of this crisis isn't something external, it's internal. He diagnoses it as a spiritual sickness, claiming our entire modern civilization is built on a foundation that's, well, dangerously unstable.
He actually calls this foundation a void. And you might ask, why a void? Well, his reasoning is that for all our amazing science and technology, our society is built on denying fundamental truths. The existence of a spiritual world, the fact that we have a soul, and the laws that govern all of that. We've basically built a civilization that ignores its own spiritual heart.
And next, he takes aim at the engine driving this whole thing, the relentless pursuit of profit. He doesn't mince words. He calls it a false religion, a modern kind of idol worship. And the idol we're all bowing down to? Numbers. Profit, sales, data, these have become the ultimate goal, a principle so powerful, he argues it's literally poisoning the human soul.
And this brings us to this really brilliant central metaphor. He says, look, we live in a world with two completely different currencies. You've got earthly currency, money, profit, all that stuff that has temporary value. But then there's this divine currency issued by God. And this currency is made of things like light, virtue, and truth, and its value is eternal. The real crisis, he suggests, is that we've completely forgotten the second currency even exists. So, if that's the diagnosis, what's the cure? The speaker doesn't just point out the problems, he offers a solution. He lays out this huge framework for building a whole new reality, a utopia, and it's all based on three core principles.
First, and this is the big one, society has to pivot away from materialism and establish a spiritual age. It's all about building a world that acknowledges spiritual truth as its foundation. And paradoxically, he argues that the very crisis he's predicting is the one thing that could actually force us to make this dramatic shift.
Second, we have to completely revolutionize our economic principles. Tying back to those two currencies, the goal is to create a system where earthly value and divine value line up. Imagine a new economy where truth itself, actions that are in sync with divine principles, actually has real, tangible worth.
And the third principle is that real change can't just be an outside job. It requires what he calls a two-sword approach. You have to reform your own inner world, your heart and mind, while at the same time, you're working to reform the external structures of society. One without the other is just incomplete.
The speech then zooms right in on the most immediate part of that path, the journey of self-reform. Because really, before you can even think about changing the world out there, you have to build what he calls a utopia of the heart right here, inside yourself.
But how do you actually do that? Well, he lays out three really practical steps. First, you need the will to change. You have to consciously decide to transform. Second, you have to accumulate spiritual truth. And then, and this is key, you have to act on it. Knowledge without action is pretty useless, right? And finally, the ultimate goal is to open the heart, to directly experience that spiritual reality and the kingdom of God within.
And this all builds to this incredibly powerful conclusion, a final vision for all of humanity and a direct challenge aimed at every single one of us.
He closes with one last really vivid metaphor. He says he sees modern people just walking around in these heavy, clanking suits of iron armor. And what is this armor made of? Well, he says it's our materialism, our pride, our fears, all the junk that weighs our spirits down.
So his call to action? It's incredibly simple, but so profound. He just urges everyone, take off the armor. He wants us to shed these burdens we've put on ourselves and rediscover how free and light our true spiritual selves really are.
And that leaves us with this final, massive challenge. The end goal isn't just about feeling better. It's about becoming an angel of light in a world that's getting darker. So the question for all of us is this. In a society that only values what it can count and measure, how do you prove the reality of the unseen world? How do you demonstrate the power of things like love, courage, truth, and faith? That's the mission he leaves for all of us to figure out.